So welcome everyone to Power Sessions. I'm here with Stephanie Mead today. We also have Tracy Johnson and Kim is in the background managing the broadcast here today. So what we're going to talk about today is mastering difficult client moments, and we all have stories of various things that we've run into. I'm going to cut right to the chase and talk about one that I had or one that I'm aware of, I should say. And here's what happened. Buyer writes an offer with a 5-day inspection period. And there's no conversation about whether or not the buyer is going to arrange for the inspections, order them and attend them, or the buyer's agent is going to be responsible. The agent goes on vacation um, and leaves 2 members of his team in place, but nobody calls the buyer and verifies that the inspections have been scheduled. Uh, Buyer's agent comes back 10 days later from vacation, and the inspection window has closed. The buyer blames it on the agent for not ordering inspections. Ruh-roh, that's a problem. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. And Stephanie, I know that you've got some input here too about situations that you've encountered.
Right. Actually, and sometimes you learn the hard way, but real estate 101 is timelines, inspections, escrow, title insurance, things like that. And I think that you have to set up a system. So, for me, I'm on a team with Isabel, and she and I immediately, under contract, form a group chat with the buyer, if we're working with the buyer or the seller, and we communicate like that. I'm old school, so I use my calendar and I use my alarms on my phone and things like that to go ahead and set ahead of time, okay, escrow's due on Tuesday, the inspection has to be done by this date. So I think establishing those systems is super important so you don't miss those deadlines. If you do, you're in trouble. Buyer's in trouble, seller's in trouble, whoever it is that you're representing. And I think it's important. Communication is important with everybody.
Exactly. So what happens when a buyer says, "Well, I didn't know what the contract says"? What questions should you be asking yourself about what you could have done differently or what you should be doing in a situation like this?
Right, because ultimately, as a professional, it relies on you and falls back to you. So it's your responsibility to make sure everybody knows what their role is and when things have to be done. And, we can't blame anything of that on anybody because it is right there in the contract. And if you're following the contract and you know your contract, and which we all should, and I think sometimes we assume that people know things automatically because either we've been doing it for so long that we get complacent, or we're new and we haven't really read over each individual paragraph, and contracts are long but they're important, and the information in there is important, and it's important to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned was you said the word system, and I totally agree. When I first got into this business, um, I figured out pretty quickly that if I was handling more than one transaction at a time, even one, but if I was handling 10 to 12 transactions going through at the same time, I had to have a system. I had to have a way to check and make sure that everything was getting done, nothing was dropped through the cracks. And back in those days, talk about old school, I actually had the old manila folders with check boxes on it on the outside. So I knew exactly. And so I would come in every Monday morning and I would look at every folder and make sure that the next check box that I had to take care of was taken care of that day or that week. Um, and we have to do that. That's our job. It's all part of the service that we bring to clients. Um, One of the things that you just mentioned was knowing the contract, and I totally agree with you about that. Did you, as the agent, walk through the contract paragraph by paragraph, or did you just send it over for their signature and dot loop?
And I think that's what happens a lot. I think, again, back in the day, you didn't have that. And so you actually went to somebody's house and you sat down with them and you went through the contract line by line. But in the days of dot loop, how easy is it to just say, here's a contract, sign here, 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 and here, and without explaining. And the worst thing is going to be to get to closing and someone say, I didn't know that. I didn't realize I was doing that. And now you've got a big mess.
Yeah. And I find that when I have those conversations, as we all should, that I will verify them with an email. I'll say, here
Right.
was our conversation this morning. Here's the next steps. Here's who's doing what and when. And I'm verifying this with an email. So you have it in front of you if you need to refer to it later. And also to protect yourself so that if they ever come back and say, well, you never told me that. Well, actually, yes, I did. Right here, this email right here.
Well, and it's also kind of an accountability thing too, because if they get that second or that follow-up email saying, hey, just want to verify that we went over this or you saw this or whatever, sometimes people get busy. And so they're like, yeah, 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 I did it. And they didn't do it. And then they see that follow-up email and they're like, oh, yeah, I need to do that. So, it's important, I think, to follow up. I had a vacant land deal last week, and we had extended the inspection period. And, I reminded him twice. Hey, because he wanted the surveys before he closed on everything. We're out of inspection period on Monday, just, making sure. I followed up on Monday. Hey, just want to make sure today's the day. And, you need to look at everything you need to look at. And so I think people get busy and they're like, oh, yeah, I need to do it by today or whatever. But the importance of that date on a contract, it's there.
Yeah. Stephanie, you brought up the thought that if they don't adhere to deadlines, that they're accepting it, the property as is. And I think I'd like to, if you would expound on that a little bit, because some of our contracts in Michigan here are time is of the essence contract and others aren't. But when you are faced with a deadline on a contract, I share what you thought about you're accepting it as is, basically.
Right. So in Florida, we kind of have the same thing. The majority of our state is as is. Do have parts that, as far as inspections go, that they have time that they can, they submit that and then the seller can fix stuff if they want or not. But in our area, as is you have the right to inspect. You've got 10 days, 15 days, whatever you put in there. And, if you want out, you can get out just by not liking what you see in the inspection. But day 11, if it's 10 days, you don't. So now you're going to forfeit your deposit at the minimum.
Yeah. So what's the first step that you do, Stephanie, when you put a contract in place or get a contract in place and the buyer has to take the next step of hiring an inspector? Well, I know that I think you give options. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's best to give at least three. Sometimes you can't find like three good inspectors, but two or three, let them make the choice. Let them decide who they want to use because the last thing you want is something coming back again on you saying, oh, I used your inspector that you told me to call, and now they missed this and I've got this problem. So I think it's important to give that responsibility back to the buyer and just say, hey, here's some, unless you have somebody else that you want to use, as long as they're a licensed contractor, licensed home inspector, you can do that.
By the way, as we're going through this, if you have questions, post them in the message box down at the bottom, and we will address them as best we can as we go through our little meeting here. Um, when if clients say they don't know what a contract meant, in my opinion, then we haven't communicated effectively. And that's our job. It's on us. We're the professionals in this situation. It's our job to ensure that clients understand exactly every single step of the process. They need to know what you're going to do and what they must do and when. Would you agree with that, Stephanie?
Absolutely. And again, I think as realtors, we get busy. And the last thing we want to do is take the time, because it does take time to go through the contract with somebody and take that time to explain everything and, go through everything. That just adds that much more to your day that you usually don't have time to do. But it is important. And again, we are the professionals, and it is up to us to make sure that that customer understands exactly what they're signing.
Yeah. And when you've had those conversations, as I said before, get it in writing. Text messages are not in
Right.
writing. Uh,
Right.
Text messages are great for like things like snippets like where are you or what's your ETA or whatever, but they're not enforceable negotiations, nor are they documentation that a clear communication has occurred. Um, Emails, signed contracts, and addenda, those are the only things that are going to hold up in court, not text messages or verbal telephone conversations. You talk about clarity and documentation equals protection. Can you dwell on that a bit?
Yeah. So again, just like you said with text, and again, we're in that day and age where, you know, we want instant. So a text is so easy to just, oh, here you go, and now it's off of your brain and you feel like you've done your job and notified. But again, slow down, take that extra few minutes to either send it in an email or, even when you're setting up your systems, you can do not an addendum, but a list of things. Here's expectations and the deadlines, right when you do that. Okay, this is going to happen this day, this is going to happen this day, have your financing approved by this day, and send that to them even through loop. Put a signature on it so they acknowledge that they have all the important dates that are coming up and what they need to do.
So when do you explain earnest money deposits and what can happen in the event something goes sideways?
I explain it at time of contract, even when you're starting to talk, okay, this is the house I want, we want to go ahead and make an offer. Okay, great. This is what it entails. And walk through that process with them then so they know what's coming. I think the worst thing is surprising people or catching them off guard. Then they start doubting you. So I think it's important to have that conversation right at the time they find that house. I mean, you can even have it along the way. Hey, when you do find a house, make sure you want to make sure they have the money. Some people don't. So the earnest money is important. If they don't make that deadline, they're basically out of contract. And they now have violated things against the seller if it's the buyer, that has that. So it's important to make sure
Yeah,
they know.
it's important too, like you said, I noticed when we were talking about the session and what we're going to talk about, confirming their understanding. I think that's a great phrase, confirm their understanding of your explanation of the contract, of the next steps, and so on. And, I think one way of doing it is the way that you've described, which is, can you explain to me or walk me through your understanding, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, your understanding of this so I can make sure that I explained it to you adequately. I think that's a great practice to get into.
Right. And I think that the timeline list helps too, just because that kind of bullet points it for them. So, this is what we talked about. Here are the timelines that need to be met. So they have that, they can keep that in front of them, oh, let me check that day because that's what I think I'm supposed to have escrow in by that day. And, that just helps keep them on track because again, we do this every day. And I think we get, so used to it and the terms and the language and, everything that a normal buyer and seller doesn't use that every day. So they're like, oh, what does she mean, escrow? I thought, what's earnest money? All of those terms that they may not use every day.
Yeah. Um, Another thing that we run into a lot is that buyers will uh, claim that you didn't explain what waiving inspections meant. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, if they waive an inspection, you need to make sure you have that signed off on because that's a big one. And I would never, never, never recommend a buyer waiving an inspection. That's just, I think, trouble waiting to happen. So I would say if they insisted, I don't need it, we want to get the deal done, then just make sure you've got that waiver inspection signed.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think waiving inspections is very dangerous. It's not something that I would recommend for a buyer unless they are an extremely seasoned buyer, an investor, for example,
Or
who
a
has,
contractor, somebody that's in the business and can see it.
right, exactly. Um, and then also say, get this in writing. Whatever it is, whatever communications you've had with the buyer, get it in writing so
Hmm.
that they understand that what you've explained to them And they can go back and refer to it, and you can refer to it if need be.
Right. Right. And even like at closing with the title companies, it seems that we've gotten to the point now where there's, 14 forms that is releasing liability and making sure people understand and all of this. And there's something to that. There's a reason, of course. And it, is something that we need to be thinking about and making sure our buyers and sellers understand everything in that contract.
Yeah. One of the areas we run into a lot of problems with is buyers not delivering their EMD in accordance with the contract. Within the 48 or 72 hours, whatever it is stipulated in the contract. So they don't show up. What happens then? What is our responsibility as the buyer's agent, for example, to the seller and to the seller's agent if a buyer fails to deliver their EMD?
Right. So good question, because I mean, it's happened, right? So, for us and in our contract that we use, if they don't deliver by the date that they've said that they'll deliver and agreed to, then they're out of contract. So not only, of course, they haven't made their earnest money, so they're financially at that point, there's nothing for the seller there, but a seller can sue. They can, sue for damages, which is lost days on market or whatever, that they feel or can come up with. So it's important, again, to communicate with the buyer, I think, and make sure that they know how important that is. And again, if it's 3 days before they have to make the deposit, follow up the day before the third day, follow up on the second day. Then again, on the third day, hey, did you make it? And usually we know from the title company because they'll send something, but just communicating that. And if it's by email, maybe to make sure you've said it and they've received it, then do it. But I don't think following up, and I don't think you're hounding people. I think you're communicating the importance of it.
Yeah. And I think there's a common misconception on the buyer's parts that their damages are limited to the EMD. And they're not. As you
Right.
say, a seller could sue for damages that go way beyond uh,
Mhm.
the amount of the EMD. So sometimes buyers will say, "Well, it's okay. I'm just not. I'm going to bail out. I don't have a basis for it. I'm past the contract, the inspection window, whatever. I haven't delivered my EMD, whatever the case is. Well, I'm just going to give up my EMD then." That's not the way it works.
Right.
The damages that could be incurred on the seller's part are conceivably the responsibility of the buyer. So,
Right. Right. Absolutely. Again,
uh,
goes back to the contract and following that and making sure everybody knows what their responsibilities are in this contract.
broker support people can join in if they like. Um, and we've got Tracy and Doug and Kim's kind of busy back there, so she probably won't. But anyway, um,
So Don, I just wrote in there, so just one step further. Hi, everyone, it's Kim. I'm news today. So what should the agent do? I think we get this question a lot. The earnest money didn't show up within the frame or it wasn't collected. And sometimes we get a call, a week down the road that, well, the buyer never sent it. So what is the obligation of the agent and what will keep them out of trouble? And I think sometimes they feel like they're not being loyal to their agent, but they do have excuse me, to their client, but they do have a responsibility when it's not collected.
yeah, they have a responsibility to immediately disclose that the EMD was not delivered, period. They have to tell the listing agent that the buyer did not deliver the EMD as quickly as they find out about it.
Right. And even as representing the seller, you need to be following up on that too. The
Mhm.
day that it's due. Was it given? And, if not, why? And find out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our responsibility as agents, as the professionals in this transaction to do this.
And,
Uh,
and Stephanie, I think you just said something about it being deposited. So often
Right.
what happens if people are out of town, what are they doing? They're taking a picture of their earnest money check and they're sending you a picture, right? And we
Right.
all go, okay, it's good. Well, no, it's not good because it's not deposited. So good point in that.
Right. And even, if you get into a bind and the buyer forgot or whatever, and you're nearing that last day, most title companies will take a wire. We've gotten to that in Florida where
Yeah.
we're wiring earnest money all the time. So that's always an option for them.
I want to talk about a couple of other frequent things we run into, which is the buyer or the buyer's agent didn't deliver a response or proposal to the inspection contingency within the inspection window. What happens then?
Again, go back to the contract. If
Yep.
the contract says that, you're out of inspection period, then you're out of inspection period. And now you have nothing. You can't ask. I mean, you can ask, but they're not obligated to do anything at that point.
But Stephanie, they were still talking about stuff, and they were like talking back and forth and sending email text messages, and they were having
And then I'm going to blame their agent because their agent should be the one saying, no, you have to have it in. I had that conversation myself again a week ago. Hey, this is it. Do it now or you're accepting it.
So we have a dead deal at that point, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, a dead deal that's going through unless they want to lose their earnest money.
There you
Yeah.
go. Okay.
And sometimes though the behavior can supersede the contract. If they start kicking the can down the road together, and they are uh, behaving as if they're going to move forward, a judge could look at that and go, "Oh no, no, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you cannot get out of the contract now because you have behaved as if you're still in the contract." So this is a very dangerous process that if you get the extensions, that's the point. Get extensions to the contract if you need them, extensions to the inspection period, whatever it is, get it all in writing so it's enforceable. If you pass the inspection window, then there's a very high likelihood, as Stephanie says, that you're out of contract now. You don't have the right to go back and ask for anything as a result of the inspections. So,
Right. And that's true. And I have had an instance too where a seller decided, like you were saying, with the judge saying, well, it looked like you're moving forward with selling. He said, you know what? I don't want to sell. Inspections were done, all of that stuff was done, and he just decided he didn't want to sell. And, you can't force him, but he does owe a commission. And he was taken to court and we were awarded the commission. So, the seller can't get out as much as the buyer can't get out, or at least be released from liability of what they're doing.
okay, I'm gonna look at some of the questions here real quickly. John, if a buyer fails to deliver an EMD, isn't it the equivalent of a bad check? All parties must be informed. Yeah, well, absolutely. Um, obviously a bad check is a criminal issue, but from the civil standpoint, as far as the contract is concerned, the buyer is in breach of contract. Other questions? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. I hope this helps. We're going to make it short because we like to keep these kind of quick and to the point. And so thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, give us a holler on the broker support line, 616-490-0902. And if you haven't signed up for the golf outing next week, I think we still have places available. Is that right, Tracy?
We absolutely do, and we have some really nice prizes too. So if you're into sports memorabilia, we have some really nice Detroit Tiger and Red Wing things signed by players. And if you're in Florida, maybe you're a Michigander planted in Florida and want to have a a memorabilia from one of those sporting teams. But yeah, so just keep in mind that broker support line. Stephanie, I don't know the broker support line by heart for Florida. Do you know it by heart?
I don't know it by heart, but I can give it to you.
I have it right here. It's 904-587-8511. So whether you're calling Michigan for support or Florida for support, we have a line for you to call directly, and we encourage you to use that at any time in your business.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.